Welcome to How to Cook That, I'm Reardon, and today we're making a Dalek cake to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Doctor Who. Now heaps of you have put it in the request that you wanted a Doctor Who cake, so you've got it to the top of the list, and we're going to make a Dalek today. So let's get started.
Make that cake! Make that cake!
Firstly, as we do with all our 3D cakes, you need to print and cut out your template for your Dalek. And you can get the template on the website howtocookthat.net. There's a link in the description below the video. You'll need a strong cake board, and I'm using a piece of MDF covered in aluminium foil. If you put extra squares of MDF on the back, it makes it easier for you to get your hands under the board and move the cake around. Take the base of the Dalek template, which is labelled A, and check that your cake board's going to be big enough for the cake. And now we're ready to make some of the details. You can do this ahead of time so you've got less to do on the day that you're putting the cake together. We're going to use chocolate for a lot of the decorations on the Dalek, so you will need to temper some chocolate. If you're new to How to Cook That, please make sure you watch the video on tempering first and on what chocolate to use. You can watch those by clicking on How to Cook That to go to the channel. Pour your chocolate onto either some aluminium foil or non-stick baking paper and spread it out. The thicker you make it, the stronger it will be, but you will also need more chocolate if you make it too thick. I made mine around 3mm thick. Leave the chocolate at room temperature until it starts to firm up, but before it's set hard, cut around the template pieces which say cut from chocolate. Make sure you read each template because some say to cut two. In that case, just flip it over and cut it in the opposite side as well and cut the second one. And these are the flat panels that go around the Dalek. You'll also be cutting out the housing to go around the blast gun, the manipulator arm, and also around the eye at the top of the cake. Just read each piece of the template, and if it says cut out of chocolate, then cut it out here. For the rings that go around the Dalek, we want them to be a bit thicker so that they're strong and so they look right on the cake. Pour out some more chocolate onto non-stick baking paper and spread it out flat using a spatula. I've put a piece on the template to indicate what thickness your chocolate needs to be here. And again, wait until it's just setting and then cut around the ring templates using your knife, then wait for it to set completely and take the excess chocolate away from around the edges. If you're making these ahead, you can store them in the fridge in an airtight container. Just separate the pieces using non-stick baking paper. Now we need to make the sensor globes. There's a circle showing what size these need to be on the template. I'm using half of a sphere ice cube tray, which I purchased on eBay fairly cheaply. You can buy hemisphere moulds out of silicone as well, but they're quite expensive, so if you just look for these, they'll be cheaper. You can fill them to the top with the chocolate, then either leave them solid or tip it out, gently tapping on the back so that you're left with just a thin layer of chocolate around the edge of the mould. Scrape off any excess chocolate and leave that to set. Now what filling you want in these is up to you. I'm using the dulce de leche, and there's a video on how to make that on the channel, or you could use peanut butter or Nutella or any of the fillings that I've showed you how to make in the chocolate truffles videos. Then top them up with chocolate and tap the mould gently to level the tops. We need them to be completely level so that they'll stick easily onto our Dalek. And we need to make 56 of these sensor globes. So once they're set, tip them out and repeat the process to make the rest. And I suggest you make a few extras just in case you need them or you want to eat some. Now we'll make some of the fondant details for the Dalek. Roll out some brown fondant and cut out the smaller rectangles marked as G on the template, and we want 6 of those. Then cut out 16 of the rectangles labelled H. And if you use a ruler and a pizza cutter, it's easier to get straight lines through the fondant. Next, take a piece of cardboard and place it in the centre of each piece and push it down to make an indent in a rectangular shape on each piece. Then using the tip of a piping tip, you can just press on each corner to make it look like a rivet on each of the rectangles. Now for the housing of the manipulator arm and blast gun. You need to cut 2 squares out of brown fondant and cut a circle out of the centre of each one, and use the piping tip to indent each corner just like we did before. In the centre front there's another square piece that's gold, and we also need to cut that out of the fondant and add the rivet marks to it and add an indent of a square right in the centre. And then we want to dust all of those using gold luster dust and a dry paintbrush over each of them so that we have a nice smooth gold colour on all of them. Where the eye comes out of the head there is a housing surrounding that too, so we need to make 2 rounded pieces for each side and a square for the top out of fondant and leave that to dry. All of the templates for these pieces are on the printout. The eye and the manipulator arm and the blast gun are all going to need support, so I'm going to use lollipop sticks in the middle of the two smaller ones and a cake spike in the middle of the manipulator arm. Let's start with the manipulator arm. Roll out some black fondant and trim each end. The cake spike needs to be longer than the arm so that it can stick into the cake. And then using your finger, slightly wet the cake spike. Then gently roll up the fondant around the spike using the paper to help you and give it a roll to make sure it's smooth, and then trim off any excess and pinch together that join so that it joins smoothly together. Use your template to make sure it is the correct length for the manipulator arm, and next take some silver luster dust and using a dry paintbrush just dust it over the fondant to give a silver finish. Then spike that into something that will hold it upright while it dries so that it doesn't get flat on one side. Next, we'll do the same thing to make the centre of the blast gun. Roll out some black fondant and trim it to the length shown on the template. Use your finger to dampen the fondant with a little bit of water and then roll it around the lollipop stick, using the paper to help you get it smooth again. Trim it and make sure it seals together at the join and give it a roll to make sure it's completely round. Adjust the length as needed and then dust with the silver luster dust just like you did the first time. The blast gun also has pieces that come out of it, so we'll make them and leave them to dry and attach them once they're firm. Roll out a thin snake out of the black fondant and use your template as a guide to bend them into the desired shape and then trim the ends off. And you'll need to make 4 of these. On the actual Dalek there's 8, but out of fondant we're only going to fit 4 and it will still look fine. Then dust those with silver luster dust and set them aside to dry. Repeat the process for covering the stick for the eye stalk, and dust it with silver just like we did with the other 2, and then leave that upright to dry so that you don't get the flat side. And then to make the black part of the eye, use the same size hemisphere mould that we did for the sensor globe and grease it with a little bit of cooking oil spray. Roll some black fondant into a ball, place it into one of the moulds, then using the end of a lollipop stick, just put it in and turn it around so that you're making a hole on the inside and an opening at the top. Take a tiny amount of bright blue fondant and roll it into a ball and drop that inside the eye, then use the end of the lollipop stick to squash it down just a little and leave that inside the mould to set. Then roll out some white and using the template cut out the circles for the insulators that go around the eye stalk. Cut out a circle of the middle of each of them, making sure it's big enough for the fondant covered stick to go through, and then leave those to dry out. You might want to make a few extras of these in case they break when you're putting them on. To make the plunger for putting on top of the manipulator arm, roll out some black fondant and put it into a hemisphere mould that has been oiled with a little bit of cooking oil. You need to use a hemisphere mould which is slightly bigger than the one we used for the sensor globes, and this one again is just half of a sphere mould of an ice cube tray, and you can get those on eBay. For the lights on top, roll a long black snake and cut it into equal lengths, and then make 2 circles the size shown on the template. These will be the ring at the base and the top of the light. And you might find it easier to make the circles if you wrap it around something that's the right size. Leave all those details to dry out for a couple of days. Now that they're dry, we can put the details together. Make a thick paste using some of your black fondant and a little bit of water. And squash it together using the back of a teaspoon, and so you've got a smooth paste. To put the insulators onto the eye stalk, roll a thin snake of black fondant and wrap it around the eye stalk, and then gently put the first insulator in place, then a big one in the middle, followed by a smaller one. On the Dalek there are actually 5 insulators, but I'm only going to use 3 of them here because the fondant's a bit thicker than the real ones, so it's still giving the right shape and effect. And using some of the black paste, carefully put the eye in place on top and leave that to set. Next, for the manipulator arm, roll a thin strip of black fondant and wrap it around the end of the arm. Trim it to the right length and gently push it into place. Put it back into the stand so it's upright, and then remove the plunger carefully from the hemisphere mould and add some of the black paste to the end of the arm and add the plunger on top and leave it to dry. To assemble the blast gun, use some of the black paste to put one of your bent pieces on either side. You might need to use some paper or paper towel under one side just to support it into position. Then use the black paste and add one more of these bent pieces to the top. And we're going to leave that to set, and we'll add the last one onto the blast gun once we've actually got the blast gun on the cake. To make the lights, they look like little ears on top. We need to attach 4 uprights to the bottom ring and then balance them in place using the top ring. You'll need to use some black paste to hold them in place, and I suggest that you enlist the help of someone else to give you a hand if you're having trouble getting it all to balance together. Now once all those details are done, leave them to dry out and you're ready to make your cakes. 3D cakes always take more cake than you think. For this Dalek, you'll need 10 quantities of the rich chocolate cake recipe, and the recipes for the cake and the frostings and the template and everything you need is on the website howtocookthat.net, and there's a link in the description below the video. We're going to bake the cake onto 12 sheet trays and 1 bowl. I like to use this chocolate cake recipe because it tastes really rich and chocolatey. It also has quite a runny consistency in the cake batter, which makes it easy to pour it onto the sheet trays evenly rather than trying to spread it out. To see which bowl you need, take the top Dalek template and use it to check if the head fits inside the bowl. If it's slightly too big, that's fine because we can trim it up later. Once the cakes are cooked and cooled, we need some frosting to put it all together, and you can use whatever flavour of frosting you like. I'm using my chocolate buttercream recipe and I'm adding some orange juice as the liquid instead of milk. And once that's smooth, I'm mixing through some chocolate orange ganache. And you can find all of those recipes on the Dalek blog post. Now to cut our cake. Use the template labelled as A to cut out one of the tray cakes. Place a smear of buttercream onto the cake board to hold the cake in place, and then add your first layer. If you put it onto a baking tray and slide it off by pulling the paper underneath it, it will make it easier to move the cake from the cake tray to the board without breaking it. Cover that first layer in frosting on the top and the sides, and that is the base of the Dalek done. The next section, if you look at the cutout of the Dalek, section BC, is where all the sensor globes are. To make that, we're going to cut around the template labelled B and add it to the cake, lining up the back of the cake with the back of the base. Smother that with another layer of frosting and add another layer, and you need to continue doing that until you get to the height of BC. So put that template piece up against the side and check if you've got to the right height. Once you've got to that height, you need to cut one more piece of cake in the shape of template C. Add that to the top of the cake. Then you need to carve this section of the cake. So to do that, cut from the top right down to the bottom shape B. And it's going to have quite a lot of cake that you're cutting off that front section so that you're carving it down into the Dalek shape. And you can use those spare pieces of cake to make cake pops, or you can freeze it and use it in another recipe later. To make the next section of your template, which is section CD, we need to add a cake board in the middle. So take 3 cake spikes and push them into your cake and mark the height on each one. Remove them from the cake and cut them all to match the length of the shortest one. By doing that, you'll make sure that the cake is level. And the reason we have a cake board here is the cake just gets too heavy and you're going to squash the cake down the bottom and it will all go out of shape if you continue just to stack it up. Put the spikes back in, add a little bit of frosting on your cake, and then put your cake board in place, a little bit more frosting, and now the next layer of the cake in the shape of template C. So this next section, CD, on the template is the part where the manipulator arm and the blast gun come out from. And you want to add more layers until you reach the height indicated by the template. Then move on to template D1. Cut more layers until you've added enough to make the height of the piece DE. This is the part where the rings go on the cake. Then put the circle template D2 on the top and carve down so that it's got a slight outward slope. And when you think you've got it about right, then get your chocolate rings out and check that they're going to fit. If they're not quite fitting, just trim a bit more cake off out of this section so that the circles will fit. Now we need to decorate this part before we add the top of the cake, otherwise the rings aren't going to go on. So to do that, cover it in a thin layer of your frosting, then roll out some black fondant thinly and cut the top and the bottom of it in a straight line and wrap it around the ring section. You can use scissors at the back to trim off any excess and a tiny bit of water on your finger to make the fondant stick to itself at the back. Get your chocolate rings and dust them with edible gold luster dust using a dry paintbrush, and then put them into place. Use the one that has the bigger hole in the middle first and then the smaller one on top of that. Then use the back of a sharp knife to indent lines around the black fondant so it looks like the recording screens on the Dalek. Trim the head section that you baked in a bowl to match the shape on the template, and then smother the whole thing in frosting. Roll out some brown fondant and drape it over the top of the head. Gently smooth that down by just lifting it and smoothing it and lifting it and smoothing it to avoid any folds in the fondant. Trim it with about 3 centimetres or a bit more than an inch of extra fondant the whole way around, and then make cuts in the fondant, but don't cut it right the way to the base or you'll be able to see gaps in it. Turn the head upside down and tuck the fondant edges onto the base the whole way round. The cuts that you've made will make it easier to get this smooth. Then add the head to the top of your Dalek, checking that it's on straight and it's just starting to come together. Now it's time to cover the rest of the Dalek in a thin layer of buttercream. Try to get it as smooth as you can. Then clean up all of the crumbs from the cake board and the bench and get ready to decorate the cake. So we need to roll out some brown fondant and then cut it in a straight line on 2 edges and then carefully wrap that around the whole base of the Dalek, just folding it over the curve that you've got there. Then we're going to roll out another strip of brown fondant, but only cut along one side, so you've got one straight side. Use your finger and just moisten the fondant and then add that strip over the top, trying to line up that bottom line so it's nice and straight going around. Lay out all of your chocolate pieces on the bench or the counter if you're in America with the templates on top so you know which is which. And then start with the 2 pieces that are labelled number 1 and add them together at the front of the Dalek. Then find piece number 2 and add that on. Then number 3, then number 4, which is the big piece, the wider one. Then add piece number 5, and finally the back piece of the Dalek. Then you want to repeat that around the other side, and your protective armour is then all in place. Roll out some more brown fondant and trim it straight at the top and the bottom. Make it wider than you think you need, and we can always trim off the extra from the top in a minute. Drape the fondant around the middle section, trying to keep the base line of it straight. Then use scissors to trim the top, leaving enough to poke it in and meet up with the black fondant that we've already got in place. Using your template, cut an extra strip of brown fondant and add it around the base of this section on both sides. Now we want to add the housing for the blaster gun and the manipulator arm. To do that, place a tray in the oven and once it's warm, place a sheet of baking paper on top and use it to melt a thin layer of chocolate on one side of one of the pieces and quickly join it to the next piece and hold it in place until that chocolate sets. Repeat that with the other side, and once that's set, dampen the fondant on the cake and push the housing into place. Then repeat that process for the other housing so you've got the 2 of them on either side. Roll a small ball of black fondant and put it inside the housing that we made. Line up the front of the housing and use some melted chocolate to hold it into place if you need to. Take the blast gun and then push the stick into the centre of the black fondant ball and into the cake. After adding the blast gun, you need to add on the 4th little prong that we have sticking out there. So just use a little bit of your paste that we made before using the black fondant, and then that will just dry up and firm up while it's sitting there. Roll another ball of black fondant, trim it and put it in the housing for the manipulator arm. Now add the front piece to the housing and then push the arm into place through the ball of black fondant and into the cake. Now we want to add the gold square into the centre of the cake and then add the short rectangles over the housing for the blast gun and the manipulator arm, and then our longer rectangles around each side of the cake. Cut a piece of brown fondant to go in the front just below the gold square, and then use a tiny bit of water on the fondant on the cake to make it stick and gently put it into place. Next, to add our sensor globes, take some gold luster dust and dust them all gold. Place a tray in the oven, and once it's warm, place a sheet of baking paper on top and quickly put the sensor globe onto the hot tray. Take it straight off and put it onto the cake. There are 4 globes equally spaced down each piece, and continue to add all these sensor globes one at a time until you've added all 56 of them, and these are an important part of the cake because it's really a feature of the Dalek that stands out. Now to add the lights, roll a small piece of white fondant into a cylinder and using a small amount of water, put it into place on the cake. Then add the black cage that you made earlier over the top. You may need to use a toothpick to secure it into place until it's dry, but make sure you take it out before you serve the cake so that nobody hurts their mouth on it. For the housing around the eye, join the top to the sides using a little bit of melted chocolate from your tray. Let that set and then fix that into place in the centre or to one side of your cake, depending which way you want the Dalek to be looking. Roll a ball of black fondant, cut the back off it and put it into place in the housing. Use the skewer to make a hole in the black fondant and then add the eye on a slight upwards angle. Roll some brown fondant out and cut it into a thin strip and place it along both sides of the housing and a piece across the top. Using a piping tip, just gently press on each corner to make the rivet holes, and now your Dalek is done. Thanks for watching, and join us next week for a dessert recipe, then chocolate, and then cake the week after that. You can put all your requests in the comments below, and I'll see you next Friday.